All right, y'all. I decided to start these Chinese astrology videos for you guys. All right, today, Friday, Sunday. I'll do it like you know, anytime I have the chance to. All right, Sunday and Friday, Chinese astrology videos. So today I'm gonna be talking about the elements, the five elements. Instead of four, there's five in Chinese astrology. Right? You got wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Now, let me tell you what each of those mean, right? And then I'll tell you about the relationship between these elements, you know? So, wood, it represents growth, vitality, and flexibility, So it encourages, you to be creative and innovative. It eventually brings you, generosity and prosperity, right? That's what wood is. Like, wood is like the trees, it represents the trees. You know how trees, bear fruit after some time, right? And then also trees are also flexible. Some people don't know that, but a tree can take damage and it's still there, right? Vitality. The next element I'll talk to you about, tell you what it represents is fire. Fire is basically the same as in Western astrology, right? Energy, passion, dynamism, like just very vibrant, loud, like fire is, right? Um, you get enthusiasm, warmth, motivation, you know, that kind of thing from fire, right? It brings leadership, and it brings assertiveness. For those that apply, some of you got to be leaders, some of you just got to be more assertive. Earth element, that brings stability, reliability, and practicality. Being more grounded and focused, that makes you a more nurturing and dependable person, later on, if you ain't that right now, right? Metal is another one of those elements, you know. Metal represents strength, rigidity, and determination, you know, bringing with it courage, ambition, and the ability to overcome any challenge. Think about metal, right? Metal is like this. It's like you can forge weapons out of metal to overcome challenges. Now that don't mean just go and forge shit out of metal and start doing that. No, it's like, you yourself need to be like that. You need to be strong, rigid, determined to get past whatever challenges face, right? Water, water element, like in, regular astrology, or Western astrology, right? It ain't just regular, it's just Western astrology. Um, and this is Chinese astrology. I'm just saying it's the same, right? Wisdom it brings, flexibility and fluidity. These people become, very sensitive, but they also want communication. Um, these people also bring, have great intuition. People have water element, heavy in their pillars. So you have these five elements distributed through four pillars in your Chinese astrology. And I'll talk about that in another video. I'll talk about that in a video. I got that coming, later. But today I'm just talking to y'all about the elements, right? And see, now we have the relationship between the five elements. So starting with wood, right? Wood feeds into the fire. That's how fire starts to grow and become fire. And it's like its existence is fueled by the wood. Now the fire goes and it fuels another existence. This existence is earth. You take, like you can take a forest or something and burn it down, right? And then you can, now that the fire has done its job, the ground is there. Now you can build all kind of shit on top of it. Anything, anything you want. But you have it takes, hard work, and you got to be realistic about shit, and all that, right? Practical about, putting yourself to work to like make that shit happen. Earth also forges what? Metal within the ground. That's how we get metal, right? Metal just don't come out of the thin air. It comes from the ground, right? These deposits are in the ground. Iron, gold, all these, precious metals are in the ground. And we take them out of the ground. And that's why the ground feeds the metal. Ground or earth feeds and generates into metal. The metal is then taken out of the ground, and then it's used to help generate water. To help generate water, we have plumbing, we have aqueducts, we have um, you know pipes, so we can get water to our sinks and all that, right? So you can drink it. You know, all this comes through the relationship of the metal and the water. The pipes help it move, help it flow to where it needs to be. And then you got, from there, you got these people also using the metal, or like hoses have a little bit of metal on it, right? Like at the hose, or at the nozzle. And what does that do? That then feeds water into the next thing, which is wood. See, we're already back at the wood. We started at wood and we ended at wood. The wood, the water feeds into the wood, right? So you're planting a tree. It needs water to survive, right? So you nourish it with water. And then eventually the trees come. And then eventually the trees can become firewood, or you can, burn that shit down if it wasn't something that you wanted, depending on the situation, right? So you can grow something new. With that new ground, you have that option. And with that new option, you can also, dig, metal out of the ground. Metal, forms over time, right? With that metal, you can then, use it to, create pipes for the ground, even cups to hold the water in, and then the water, and it's all a cycle, and that's the like, um, that's the harmonious cycle for these elements. There's another cycle for these elements, or these elements also don't interact great with other elements. So wood, right? Wood don't interact well with metal, because metal cuts it down. Metal cuts the trees down, right? Boom. Metal's cut down. Metal cuts wood. You know, fire is doused and put out by water. It dies when it comes in contact with water. Earth is affected by the wood, because when you plant something in the ground, you don't know what's like. Sometimes you could get a bad crop, right? Some years, right? And that's affecting the ground. You could have planted something in the ground that wasn't like that. That comes from lack of taking care of the wood and other things, but it affects the ground too. You want to be on some strong ground, strong good soil, so that the plants can grow properly. But the you know earth is negatively affected by the woods. With the metal, it's negatively affected by fire. Fire burns metal. It burns it, to make it more, malleable. Because like when it comes out of the ground, it didn't just pipes and guns. You don't just pull that shit out of the ground. You have to like take it to a blacksmith. You have to take it to people who, um, do like metallurgy and all that shit, and they turn the metal using heat into other things. But it damages the metal because the metal has to, get burned and go through some shit, right? Water has a negative relationship with, or it's not even negative, y'all. It's just, this is a more challenging relationship. Water's challenging relationship is with earth. Earth contains the water. The water can become contaminated by the earth, but it's also restricted by the earth. Now, you might say that the water is restricted by metal, but see, the metal is giving the water more purpose for like lives for human beings. Like I said, we have plumbing, we need water to get to our showers, for us to drink, drinking water, water to water our gardens with. The metal's actually used for that. And then when it comes to like the ground and earth, it's like, it's contained. It can't be as flexible as it needs to, right? But see, even with these negative things, it's necessary too. See, because if you don't cut the wood down to burn it, you can't you can't do much, right? You need to cut the wood down, cut these trees down to like burn, fire, right? To create fire. It all, comes together. You got fire. You don't need shit burning like continuously. You don't need to keep burning wood. You gotta, put that shit out. You don't need to keep burning this, fire, right? So the water is necessary to put out the fire. Earth, to contain the water. You don't want water just leaking everywhere, right? You need it to be contained. You don't want, floods and shit like that. So, Earth's there to, contain that, right? Metal needs to take shape. It ain't just going to take shape. It needs to be welded, melted, and then, cooled down afterwards to make something of use. Water gets contained by the earth. The earth, like I said, it's affected by the, um, wood, because you plant something in the ground and then something comes up. But all that time it's been on the ground, you could have had something more useful there in place of that. So like somebody wants you to grow a certain crop and then you grow something else. You weren't supposed to grow that crop, all that time that you could have been used to grow the other crop. So yes, the wood is damaging to the earth. But then again, you're still getting something out of it. You know, there was something produced from the ground, but it wasn't what somebody wanted. You know, you don't want to necessarily waste that. But that is the relationship between these, five elements, what they mean. Each animal, every year you have a element attached to the animal for like for your year pillar, for your month pillar, for your day pillar, and your hour pillar. And I'll be talking about that in a video. But this is just getting you up to speed on the elements. So be cool and stay tuned for more Chinese astrology.